Starting today, Mom's moving in with us. My husband, Luke, announced, right in the middle of our anniversary dinner. His mother, Carol, smirked at me and said, "You'll adjust." I always do. But her smile faded fast when I pulled out a document, set it on the table, and said, "Perfect timing. Looks like it's a double celebration." Because I'm adjusting too. The wine was perfect. Candlelight flickered off the little silver holder between us, casting a soft glow on the table. Luke reached across and squeezed my hand. 5 years, he said, smiling. Can you believe it? I smiled back, though something in his eyes felt off. Barely. Feels like yesterday you spilled wine on my lap during that first date. He chuckled, and I leaned into the warmth of the moment. For once, everything felt still, quiet, good. But I should have known that wouldn't last. My name's Adam. I'm 37 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. And this was supposed to be the night my husband made me feel like the most loved person on earth. Instead, Luke cleared his throat and sat up straighter. So, I have something to tell you. Something important. My stomach dipped. Okay, well, it's kind of exciting. My mom's moving in with us. I blinked. Sorry, what? Luke smiled, like it was a great idea. Carol's been feeling lonely, and the condo's too big for her. It just makes sense. She'll take the guest room. You mean the room I've been using for design work? For my projects? Luke's expression faltered slightly. We'll figure something out. She doesn't take up much space. I pulled my hand back. You decided this without talking to me? Carol chose that moment to make her entrance, as if she'd been waiting. Her heels clicked across the floor of the restaurant, her hair perfectly curled, that familiar smug expression painted across her face. Surprise, she said, sliding into the empty seat beside Luke. I told him not to tell you until tonight. Make it special. You told him? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She waved her hand like I was being dramatic. Oh, don't be so tense, dear. You'll adjust. I always do. I opened my purse slowly, pulling out the folder I'd been holding onto for weeks now, unsure when I'd find the right time. Maybe I didn't expect it to be tonight, but if Carol was ready to play chess, I was ready to flip the board. Well, I said, laying the folder gently on the table. Looks like it's a double celebration. Because I'm adjusting too. Luke's eyes flicked down to it. What's this? I didn't say a word, just sipped my wine. Carol leaned forward, smile faltering as she read the bold title through the clear sleeve on the front page. Property Transfer Agreement, Cold Spring Cottage. I bought a place, I said calmly. A little cottage, quiet, outside town. Closed on it last month. Luke looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You bought a house? I sure did. I folded my napkin neatly. Since apparently we're in the business of making big life decisions solo, I figured I'd get with the program. Carol narrowed her eyes. That's childish. No, Carol, what's childish is showing up uninvited to someone's anniversary dinner and announcing your new living arrangement like it's a baby shower. Silence. The server approached with the cake, but nobody touched it. I looked at Luke, his face pale and blinking. Then at Carol, her mouth tight. I'd expected to feel shaky. I didn't. I felt still, sharp. Let them chew on that. I'd waited 5 years for Luke to stand up to his mother. He hadn't. So now I was standing up for myself, and I hadn't even opened the folder yet. Luke and I met at a gallery downtown, one of those pop-up exhibits in a repurposed textile mill with uneven brick floors and string lights hanging from old rafters. I was there for the architecture, the building itself, the bones of it, not the paintings. Luke was studying a large canvas, lips pursed like he was trying to find meaning in the chaos of brush strokes. We started talking about composition. 2 hours later, we were the last ones in the place. I fell for him quickly. He had this softness, gentle hands, a curious mind. We'd stay up late watching documentaries about buildings and design, passing a sketchpad back and forth. He wasn't an architect, but he appreciated it. That meant something to me. Carol, at first, seemed warm. Back then, she wore chunky scarves and brought over casseroles that tasted like actual effort. She'd pat my arm and call me sweetheart and laugh a little too hard at my jokes. I thought she liked me, but Carol had a way of showing affection that always made her the center of it. It started small, little comments that felt harmless. You hang your pictures so high, Adam. I read that short ceilings need lower art. Or, that's an interesting lamp. Not quite my taste, but you do you. I'd laugh it off. Luke didn't seem to notice, and I didn't want to stir anything up. I figured maybe she just needed time. She was a widow, after all. Maybe it was just an adjustment. But then she started dropping by without calling. She'd let herself in when we weren't home, claiming she was watering the plants or dropping off soup. But I'd come back and find the throw pillows rearranged, the books on the coffee table stacked in neat piles like a waiting room. Once, she swapped out the artwork in our hallway with an old cross-stitch she claimed Luke had made as a kid. I asked him about it. He barely remembered it, but he didn't put it back. After the wedding, things got worse. She started staying overnight to avoid driving in the dark, even though she lived only 20 minutes away. I'd wake up and find her in our kitchen, already brewing coffee like she owned the place. She didn't ask. She just inserted herself. Luke brushed it off. She's lonely, he'd say. Let her feel included. So I let it go. Again and again. I told myself I was making peace for the sake of my marriage. But the peace started costing me. Every time I changed something in the house, she had something to say. New couch. It's too modern. Paint the living room. It looked better before. Less cold. And Luke, for all his sweetness, never told her no. That's when the doubt started. I remember one night, maybe a year into our marriage, I came home late from a client meeting. Carol was there, feet up on our couch, watching a true crime documentary. Luke was in the kitchen, pouring her a glass of wine. She looked over at me and said, "I told Luke you'd probably work late. You always do." It wasn't just a comment. It was a claim. Like she knew me better than my own husband did. I stood there holding my bag, shoes still on, thinking, does she ever plan to leave? I told Luke we needed boundaries. He promised he'd talk to her, and maybe he did, but nothing changed. If anything, she started showing up more often. It wasn't just a mother-in-law overstaying her welcome. It was a slow erasure of space, of me, in my own home. My routines, my choices, my voice. I began to wonder, if it ever came down to it, would Luke choose me? That's the question that sat in the back of my throat every time she criticized my cooking or rolled her eyes when I reached for the remote. Every time she called him my boy, like I was just the roommate. And now that she was moving in, permanently, apparently, that question didn't feel hypothetical anymore. It felt like a warning. The dinner had gone quiet after I laid that folder on the table. Luke didn't open it. He just stared at it, like maybe if he waited long enough, it would disappear. Carol looked like she was waiting for her turn to speak again, but I didn't give her one. Not yet. I wasn't done being blindsided, because the thing that really stuck with me wasn't just that she was moving in. It was that Luke had promised this wouldn't happen. It was maybe 3 months ago. We were sitting on the deck, watching the dog chase fireflies in the backyard. I had brought it up casually, because Carol had made another one of her comments that week, something about how the guest room really needed a more feminine touch. She's not planning to move in, is she? I'd asked, half joking, half praying I wasn't right. Luke had laughed. No way. She'd never want to live here full time. She likes her condo too much. I had nodded, but I didn't really believe him. Still, hearing him say it, it mattered. And now here we were. I sat back in my chair as the server brought over the cake we had pre-ordered weeks ago. A simple white buttercream with "Happy 5 years" written in cursive icing. I'd picked it up myself earlier that day. No one touched it. Luke finally cleared his throat. I didn't think it would upset you like this. You didn't think? I said quietly. That's the problem, Luke. You didn't think to tell me. To even ask. Carol tilted her head like a smug little owl. Honestly, Adam, you're making too much of this. It's not a permanent thing. You said it was permanent. I snapped. You literally said that to me 15 minutes ago. Luke shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean it that way. I just meant she'd be staying for a while. A while. So, a few weeks? A few months? Indefinitely? Or just until she dies in my sewing room? Carol gasped. That's cruel. No, I said. What's cruel is inviting yourself into someone else's home without asking. What's cruel is standing here on my anniversary and acting like you've just done me a favor. She narrowed her eyes. Don't be dramatic. I didn't even look at her. I looked at Luke. You promised me this wouldn't happen, I said. I brought it up. You told me, your words, that she wouldn't live with us. He looked down, like the candlelight was suddenly too much. She didn't have anywhere else to go. She had a place, Luke. She has a condo. You mean she didn't want to be alone? That's not the same thing. The table behind us started singing happy birthday to someone. For a second, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Carol picked up her wine glass. You're overreacting. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a second folder, the one Carol didn't know about, the real one, the one that held every receipt, every permit, and every design sketch for the little cottage I'd been building for months on the edge of Black Mountain. I didn't open it, just tapped it lightly with one finger. Luke looked at it like it was a detonator. You wanted a surprise, right? I said softly. Well, here's mine. And just like that, the balance shifted. Carol's smug smile slipped. Luke didn't say a word. Neither of them reached for the cake. And in that silence, I knew I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. After the cake sat untouched for 20 minutes, the server came by and asked if we wanted it boxed. Luke just nodded silently, like he'd forgotten where he was. Carol pretended to be interested in her napkin, folding and refolding the corner with precise little movements. I, on the other hand, wasn't done. The tension had smothered the table like wet cement. I stood up and said, loud enough for our nearby guests to hear, Luke, could I speak to you privately for a moment? Carol immediately lifted her head. If this is about me, I'd prefer to be present. It's not about you, Carol, I said, meeting her eyes. Not everything is. Luke followed me, wordless, as I led him to the small event alcove near the restrooms, still in earshot of our friends, but just far enough away for this to feel surgical. I turned to him, folder still in hand. You want honesty? I said, here it is. I bought the cottage because I needed air. I needed space from your mother, and, frankly, from this version of you. He blinked. What do you mean? This version. The one who makes decisions without me. The one who lets his mother criticize everything from my omelets to our couch cushions, and then tells me I'm overreacting. He looked at the floor. I wasn't finished. I bought that place on my own, paid in full, restored it piece by piece. New windows, new deck, even the plumbing. And I didn't tell you because I needed something in my life that she hadn't sunk her claws into. You're acting like this is war, Luke said quietly. No, I said. I'm acting like someone who finally picked up a sword after being picked apart one passive-aggressive jab at a time. He opened his mouth, but I held up the folder. This isn't just a hobby or a side project. I've moved furniture in. I've got groceries stocked. I even have a mailbox with my name on it. This cottage, this is mine. But you didn't even tell me. Exactly, I said. Just like you didn't tell me your mother was moving in. I guess we're even. Behind us, the group of guests we'd invited for dessert tried to carry on politely. A few had already gotten the message and left, their seats now empty. The whole celebration had crumbled into a quiet standoff. Luke ran a hand down his face. I don't know what to say. Then let me help you, I said, stepping forward. You tell Carol that her plan isn't happening. She's not moving in. Not now. Not ever. He looked at me, caught between shame and resistance. And if you can't do that, I said, you need to understand what that means for us. Just then, Carol walked over, interrupting like she always did, her voice tight. Is this your tantrum, Adam? Really? A secret house? Threats? I turned to her slowly, my voice steady. No, Carol, this isn't a tantrum. This is what it looks like when someone stops rolling over. She scoffed, looking at Luke. Are you really going to let him talk to me like this? I stepped in before Luke could answer. He doesn't have to let me do anything. I'm not asking permission anymore. And with that, I walked back to the table, picked up the folder, and addressed the room. Sorry, everyone. Change of plans. There won't be a toast, or cake, or a house guest. Nobody moved. Luke followed, slowly, quietly. His hand brushed the back of the chair, but he didn't sit. The last of the guests left without saying much. Awkward goodbyes, barely their hugs. A few gave me sympathetic looks. Carol stood frozen, her wine glass still half full, her presence no longer welcome, but too proud to leave first. Eventually, it was just the three of us left. I looked at Luke. This is the line, I said. You decide which side you're on. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Carol didn't have anything to say. The next morning, I packed a bag and drove to the cottage. I didn't leave in a rage. There was no slammed door, no screaming match, just quiet resolve. I left Luke a note on the kitchen counter, folded neatly beside the untouched anniversary cake. I need space. Please respect that. Adam. The cottage smelled like pine and drywall dust, clean, still unfinished in some corners. I dropped my duffel by the front door and walked into the little kitchen. It felt good to move around the space, to open cabinets I'd built myself, to hear only my own footsteps echo against the hardwood. Nobody telling me I should reorganize the spices. Nobody scolding me for leaving shoes by the door. That first night, I sat on the porch with a blanket and a thermos of tea and watched the light fade behind the trees. I thought about what I'd done, not with regret, but with something closer to relief. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was peace. Luke started texting that same night. Luke, are you safe? Luke, please let me come by, just to talk. Luke, I didn't mean for any of this to happen like that. I didn't respond. Not yet. I needed time to think without having to explain everything to someone who hadn't been listening in the first place. Carol, unsurprisingly, didn't reach out, but I knew she was still at our house. Of course she was. She probably had her bags unpacked before dessert was even cleared. Over the next few days, I made a list of everything I needed to do. I found a lawyer in town, a soft-spoken woman named Tracy with kind eyes and a sharper pen than anyone I'd met in the city. I told her I needed to set up independent finances, protect my assets, and, if it came to it, have a plan for separation. I also booked a session with a counselor. Not couples therapy, just me. A safe place to untangle years of people-pleasing and quiet tolerance. Because here's what I realized, sitting in that tiny living room under a thrifted lamp. I had spent 5 years being polite, 5 years biting my tongue and shrinking myself so Luke wouldn't feel torn between me and his mother. 5 years believing that if I was just patient enough, gentle enough, forgiving enough, he'd eventually choose me without hesitation. And he never did. Meanwhile, Luke sent more texts, some long, some short, a few apologies mixed with guilt. At one point he called and left a voicemail that sounded like he'd been crying. Luke, I miss you. She's still here. I know I messed up, but I'm trying to figure it out. Please don't give up on me. I listened to it once, then set the phone down. I spent the next few days working on the cottage, painting baseboards, hanging curtains, finding a kind of calm in the ritual of building something with my own hands. It became therapy in motion. Each coat of paint felt like reclaiming space. Each fixed drawer, a small boundary redrawn. I wasn't cutting Luke out of my life. Not yet. But I was cutting out the parts of myself that had gone quiet just to keep the peace. And slowly, I started to feel like a person again. Not a husband, not a host, not a referee stuck between someone's guilt and someone else's judgment. Just Adam. One night, I looked out the window as rain tapped softly against the glass. I turned off my phone, crawled into bed, and slept harder than I had in months. Whatever came next, I'd meet it with both feet on the ground. It took another week before Luke finally asked the question I'd been waiting to hear. Luke, can we go to counseling? Together. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to be sure he was. I didn't want another apology soaked in fear of being alone. I wanted real effort, real change. I wrote back one word, yes. We met at a small practice downtown. The counselor, Melissa, was in her 50s, with salt and pepper curls and a voice that could probably talk a rabid dog down from a fence. She welcomed us into the room like we were guests in her home. Luke looked nervous, knees bouncing, thumb tapping against his jeans. He didn't look at me until she asked him to. "Tell me why you're here," she said gently. Luke glanced over, then backed down. "Because I lost something, and I don't want to pretend anymore that I didn't help drive it away." That was the first time I saw him really admit it. Not defend, not deflect, just admit. I stayed quiet. I wanted to hear what else he'd say. He talked for a while, about how he never meant to hurt me, about how he thought staying neutral with Carol was keeping the peace, not realizing that neutrality was a choice that always left me alone. "I guess I thought if I didn't take a side, no one could say I was wrong," he said. Melissa nodded. "But what did that cost your marriage?" He looked at me. "Everything." I didn't cry. I didn't soften. Not yet. But I nodded. When it was my turn, I told her about the anniversary dinner, about the years before that, Carol's quiet control, the way she turned my home into her territory, one plant and throw pillow at a time, and about Luke, who always said he'd talk to her, but never did. "I just kept shrinking," I said, "and I didn't even notice until I didn't recognize myself anymore." Luke reached for my hand. I let him hold it. Melissa asked the hard questions. What boundaries needed to be set? What accountability would look like? What would it take for me to feel safe again? I answered clearly. "Carol doesn't live with us. Ever. She doesn't have keys. She doesn't drop by without calling. And if she breaks that boundary, you tell her to leave. Not me." Luke nodded slowly. "Okay. And," I added, "this doesn't work if you keep hoping we'll all magically get along. You have to be willing to upset her if it means protecting me." He swallowed. "I will." It wasn't a miracle fix. There were still cracks. But for the first time in a long time, I felt heard. When we left the office, we stood beside each other in the parking lot, hands in our pockets, both of us watching the slow creep of dusk. "I don't expect you to move back in yet," he said. "Good," I said. "I'm not ready." But I was ready to see if he could meet me halfway. And that was something. 3 months passed. We kept going to counseling, every other Thursday at 4 p.m., like clockwork. Luke never missed a session. He showed up, took notes, asked questions. He didn't just apologize anymore. He listened. He sat in the discomfort and didn't run from it. He even began pushing back on Carol. The first time he did it, he told me afterward, she'd shown up at the house with a lemon cake and a bag of frozen meals, acting like everything was back to normal. He met her at the door. "I told her she needed to call first," he said, "and that if she wants to be part of our life, she has to respect both of us. Not just me." I looked at him and saw it in his face, how hard that had been for him. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he'd never really told her no before. "She left without saying goodbye," he added. "But I didn't chase her." I just nodded. "Good." We talked more openly now, sometimes for hours, about the early days of our relationship, the way things had slowly shifted, how I had let too many little things slide until the resentment became a wall between us. I didn't sugarcoat anything, and Luke didn't flinch. By mid-September, the trees around the cottage had turned. I'd stained the deck, finally hung the last of the curtain rods, and made the tiny guest room into a reading nook. It didn't feel like a backup plan anymore. It felt like mine. Then, one Saturday morning, Luke came by with coffee and warm biscuits from the diner downtown. We sat on the porch, watching birds pick at the feeder, wrapped in our own quiet. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the cottage, about us." I waited. "I know we've made progress, and I want to keep going, but I don't want to pretend we can go back to the way things were. I don't want you to feel like you have to come home just because things are better." I looked at him. "So what are you saying?" He smiled, faint but genuine. "I'm saying I'm okay with us building something new, even if it looks different than before." That hit me harder than I expected, because it wasn't just acceptance, it was respect. "I want to keep the cottage," I said quietly, "not as a punishment, not as a wedge between us, just as something that's mine, a space that reminds me who I am." "I think that's a good thing," he said. I nodded. "So if we're rebuilding, it has to be on new terms, shared ones, where I don't shrink, and you don't hide, and we don't play hostess to your mother like she owns the deed." Luke laughed softly. "Deal." Later that week, we met with Melissa one last time, not to end counseling, but to mark the shift. The sessions didn't feel like damage control anymore. They felt like foundation work. That Friday, we had dinner together, just the two of us, in our old kitchen. Carol wasn't there. Her spare key was sitting on the counter, untouched. Luke had asked for it back 2 weeks ago, and she'd mailed it without a note. I noticed the space in the guest room was empty. The framed photo of her and Luke had been moved to a storage box. We were taking small steps, but they were ours. When our anniversary came around again the following year, we didn't throw a big dinner or plan a trip. Instead, we met at the cottage, lit a fire, and ordered takeout from the same diner we used to go to in the early days. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, side by side. No drama, no declarations, just a quiet evening, marking something stronger than survival. This time, we were choosing each other, and we both knew it.